Hello, Sanbonani. Welcome to the fourth episode of my podcast titled Divide and Decide, where we discuss the drivers and influences in the decision making process of planners and also the decision making process within the mind of the planner themselves. So, then our previous episode went over the idea or the concept of self examination, where we looked at Cake Burner, where one looks within, if translated to Afrikaans. So then in this episode, we saw how the values of a person sort of like drive them to make certain decisions, you understand? And then we looked at the apartheid era planners who had certain values and how these values sort of like translated into, their practice. So then today's episode relates to our previous episodes as it is titled, What is the Motive? Understand? So then in today's episode, we look at what could be the motive behind, why planners actually, do certain things within the planning field, or why certain things result in the way that they do, such as, consistent inequalities, even though plans look good on paper, or, issues of fraud or corruption, understand? So then the episode, will mostly be gravitated around the question of, what drives planners, you understand? What values drive them, or is it their values or money that drive them? You understand? To what extent do ethics apply to the planners, you understand, and their decision making? So the planning process is generally bureaucratic in nature, you understand, which leads to it being very power laden, you understand. So only things can mostly be done if you understand a degree of power is present. So then this can be a person's position within the system or the process, and also the capital that the person might have to make sure that their processes are fully attended to, or their decisions are the ones that are chosen in certain issues and matters. Or also the network of the person matters, since knowing a few people or being connected to a few people can drive processes a little quicker than one is used to, or how the bureaucratic bureaucratic process is structured. So then the power laden system leads to an ethical vacuum. We see this a lot in news with issues of corruption, where values of inclusivity, fairness, and Ubuntu in general are thrown out of the window just to put personal agendas, you understand, and that are usually capital driven, which makes compromising ethics easier and leads to corruption. So the corruption contributes to the planning process and other processes in career being, power laden. As typical perpetrators of this corruptions are senior officers, as we see in, news, in our current day news, as we see in many of the literature that we read, you understand, and then also in high power positions, how they use their power to sort of like get agendas pushed forward above the agenda of the people below them, you understand? So then this agenda is usually pushed, you understand, or is usually not constrained by bureaucracy because of the capital that they have. Today's episode, I'll be joined by a fellow colleague and friend, Inez Adams, who's also doing an honors degree in urban and regional planning. Welcome, Inez. How are you doing this evening?
Hi, Yuri. Thanks for having me. All good on my side. All good.
That's great. That's great. That's great. Are you ready to tackle this discussion together?
I think so. I
Okay.
think so.
Okay, no problem. Let's get to it. So then, the first thing on our agenda or the discussion point that we're going to, tackle together is how much do you personally think the bureaucratic system influences people to act unethically?
Okay, in my opinion, I feel like that's quite a tricky question actually. But when I was thinking about it, I was looking back at our readings that we got for the course, and I was looking particularly at the reading by Alexander et al. That looked at South African planning, and I think it was planning in Zambia. And basically in that article, when they were looking at South Africa, because obviously I think it's more important to have a discussion about South Africa than other countries, um, they looked at how our bureaucratic system in South Africa, right? Because it's so extensive and so regulatory, it actually is an influencer of unethical acts. That things like corruption, things like non-compliance, and so I think it's essentially saying that a bureaucratic system, although it can be in place for good purposes, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to play out that way or that people are going to see it as a good thing. So, for example, when I just think about it, we have all these like processes in order to get something like building rights. You have to make sure you're according to all these different legislations. It has to go through this. You have to get approval. It's such a long, tedious process, and it requires so much from you that in itself it becomes like, okay, let's see how we can fast track this. And so what you see end up happening is that people that have the means will speed up the process with that whole capital. Because they have the capital, they'll use that capital and be like, okay, let's, plan or whoever, let's speed up this process because I need this to be developed or that to be developed. And then linking back to what you're talking about, power, that also shows the power divide, because if you don't have the means to speed up processes, you end up either stuck and in a state where you can't develop, you can't progress, whatever, or you end up going through other channels that maybe are, informal or illegal or whatever, just because the, formal bureaucratic system is going to take so long, it's going to cost X amount of money, it's tedious, it's burdensome, it's all these, it's just a hassle. So yeah, I think it's in the South African case, anyway, we do see how the bureaucratic system influences this unethical behavior.
Yeah, that's very true. That's actually a good way to put it, because we see that a culture has even developed around this whole system, and it's very, ironic in a sense, because you're trying to keep order, and your attempt to
Mm,
keep order is sort of like causing more disorder and a culture of
exactly.
disorder, and yeah, the ethics is just thrown out of the window. You understand? So
Exactly.
this leads up to like our second point. You understand? Which is given the ethical vacuum that exists in the system
Mm.
already, you understand, that I mentioned earlier. How do you think that this links to the decision making process being, capital driven?
Well, yeah, then kind of like linking back to what I said before, it's like the decision making process is maybe favoring people that have capital, or it's favoring those that have the ability maybe to go through all these proper procedures and the proper channels, but then it's that power imbalance, because it's being it's yeah it's so rigid and so like so many steps in the process that either you have the time and money to go through all those steps,
Oh,
or you have the extra capital to fast track you. And if you don't have the time or the money or the capital, you're stuck and you're going
yeah,
through
yeah,
informal
yeah, yeah.
channels, or you're not developing, or you're losing out on investment opportunity. So it's just like, I think it is very power laden, like what you were saying, the whole, because it's not just like the system itself being, unfair or unequal, but it's then kind of excluding people, or in itself, the way it's set up, it's allowing some people to benefit from it more, or to like go through these like fast track channels, and then other people can't even go through the procedure because it's just not
Yes.
feasible. So yeah, I think it's tricky. It is a tricky situation.
Yeah, it is very tricky. It is very tricky. I mean, we see this, and one might immediately think that, okay, if there's no rules, then hey, it might be easier to sort of like get things done. But then, in this environment
Yeah.
of not having any ethics, you understand, you might think that, okay, anything might go for anybody. But then there's
Mhm.
still this degree of power that you mentioned, Johnson. There's still this
True.
degree of power that sort of like drives everything to happen. You
Mm.
understand? That's a very, very interesting point. So then the reading you're actually referring to, is titled Challenges and Opportunities of Curbing Urban Corruption and Building Professional Integrity, Experiences of Planners in South Africa and Zambia. So I extracted a quote from this reading, and it goes as follows. It's not about fixing the rotten apples, but it's about fixing the barrel. How valid do you, Inez Adams, think that this is?
I think that statement is very relevant and valid, actually, because I think when I just read it without even like looking at what the article was saying is kind of like fix the system, not the people. So it's almost saying that like look at the actual system or the processes that are currently in play and look at how those might be enabling or facilitating like individuals. Yeah, it might be facilitating the process of corruption because individuals are able to manipulate or use that system to their benefit. So it's like look at the system first, or look at the overall structure first and the context first, and try to look at how you can change, because it's essentially like that system or whatever's in play is indirectly allowing and supporting this unethical action. So it also, I think the quote is kind of like be more efficient with your like strategies or intervention, like fix the system rather than fixing individuals. Because if you think about it, if a system is corrupt or if something is, problematic and there's lots of holes and ways to go around and, play with it or whatever, or manipulate it, then cool, you fix the rotten apples for the next 5 years. In 5 years' time, there's going to be new rotten apples that come and use
That's
the
true.
system in the same way. And then you like intervene, okay, get rid of those rotten apples. Following 5 years, the same thing happens. So rather don't don't draw it out, this process where we know that people can come and use it and take advantage of it. Don't let it happen for so long. Rather stop the whole system from allowing that to happen so that you are being more efficient and effective with how you are managing, corruption and unethical behavior, because you're basically stopping it at its root cause. You're not allowing it to continue. So yeah, basically rather stop the system than the actors, because actors will, you get rid of them, new actors will come, new people will come, new
Yes.
uh, people will come and take the job position and still abuse it, be corrupt, etc. So fix the system first. Then that abuse and the corruption won't be able to be supported because the system will have changed.
Yeah, thanks for your input, man. Thanks for your input. And this brings us to like thinking that okay, this doesn't help the trickle down effects, you understand, such as
Mm.
inequality. It doesn't help at all because I mean the very same people that you're supposed to be helping are the very same people that are suffering from your unethical behavior. You understand?
Mm.
That's you brought up very good points. So
Yeah.
the same piece of literature, you understand, suggests that ways to fill the ethical void is through the structures providing a holistic professional conduct in decision making. So what do you think this might look like tangibly?
Um, yeah, I mean, when I read that article, I think it made a lot of sense in that what it was one of the elements I was kind of looking at was this whole almost like a mindset shift. So moving away from, like, I think they refer to it as like the binary thinking of being compliant or not compliant, and how looking at that binary is not helpful because it's really not like answering the issues of corruption, and it's just it's they're basically saying like it's just not a good way to look at it and think about the future planning. And so to rather move away from that whole binary compliance non-compliance thing, and to look at moving towards integrity. And by integrity, they're kind of like focusing on the ethical and legal duty of like planners and policymakers. And it was almost like I think it was it's called like I'm not sure who coined it or anything, but it was something like the logics of appropriateness. I think, yeah, logics of appropriateness. And it's like planners can use this logics of appropriateness to actually um enable them to make decisions that are in favor
Mhm.
of the public good, but are also in line with their duties as planners. Because as planners, your whole job is around the public good. It's about, the city. It's about making sure people live cohesively. There's equality, all those good things. And so it's almost shifting the mindset, like have integrity and have this logics of appropriateness where you almost like you're using your own agency as a planner, your own what you've learned, what your position is in the country and development of the city and everything, and your decisions will be centered towards the public good and towards like norms that are deemed socially correct. So things like
Yes,
equality,
yes.
it's a good thing, it's a correct thing, rather than this whole idea of moving towards that like capitalist power imbalance thing where I think they spoke about like the cost benefit. So like doing things that would almost, yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, the cost benefit. So you're looking at how it would benefit those more in like the capitalist position or something like that, rather than looking at like the public. Yeah. So it's just kind of that idea of using logics of appropriateness as a planner when making decisions and, when being, in situations where there's corruption and everything, that you need to have the whole thing of integrity, which links to that holistic, what the point that you were talking about, like the holistic position. I think that's what you the holistic professional conduct.
Holistic
Because
professional
yeah,
conduct, yes.
because by doing that, but like in having the logics of appropriateness and in having that integrity, I feel like that is the holistic conduct, the holistic professional conduct, because you are being firstly like I guess like if I were to break it down and just think about like not looking at any academics or anything, but like having like being holistic firstly looks at everything. So where currently there is this power play that's not holistic, where there is this bureaucratic system that is going to favor people that have the time and the money to get through all the procedures, and it's not going to cater towards those that don't have time or don't have the money. That's not holistic, because it's not fair. It's not looking at everybody and where people are. And so I feel like that comes down to also then the professionalism, where you're not being persuaded and manipulated and influenced by corruption and unethical acts and all those sorts of things. And so you're actually being professional, but you're being professional in your duty as a planner or as a somebody in that area where you're making decisions and you're thinking about the public good. You're thinking about what the society needs first before you're thinking about like the more, how can we benefit from this decision in a like a financial way. So yeah, that's my opinion on that question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you keep emphasizing, the holistic part, saying that okay, um, we should be able to not only just see, one part of it, but then, see everything. You understand? Like we shouldn't just address, the actors and just the system where the actors operate, but then the system that causes the people to operate. You understand? The system that
Yeah,
causes the motives that we're talking about today. You understand? So yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate, your input on this. I mean, it makes us link. It makes me think about the previous episode also about the looking within the values. You see how it strongly links to the ethics. You understand? It
mm-hmm.
links strongly to the ethics and the desire to actually say, okay, I'm going to be professional and I'm not going to allow this to compromise my ethical
Mm.
standpoint. You understand? Yeah, for your contribution. Like it just brings everything together to show that okay, there's many things to actually look at when we want to
Mm.
address, the ethical aspect of things. I understand it's not just, the system itself or the people itself, but then, it's actually us going out of our way to actually, fix the reasons,
Yeah,
for
exactly.
our, unethical behavior and all that. So yeah, thanks a lot, Inez Adams. I appreciate your contribution
Thanks
and
for having me,
appreciate you
Yuri.
being here. Always a pleasure, always a pleasure. And thank you to our listeners for staying this long. Thanks for the support and all. Uh, please be sure to tune into our last episode, which is going to be, which is going to conclude our podcast journey, and it's going to round up all the ideas that we had and then bring up a conducive conclusion that relates to the title of Divide and Decide. So be sure to tune into the next episode.